Hey everybody, welcome back to the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett, and we're having another fishing conversation here on the program this week. Joining us from Illinois is Miah Bolyard from Dark Side Crappie Company. Miah, thanks for being here. How you doing today, man?
Thanks for having me, Brent. Doing pretty good.
Well, thanks for joining us here. We got connected from a mutual party, Derek Martin, who is from Illinois as well and was on our show here a few weeks back, and we've had him on talking some crappie fishing, and he got you and I connected, and looking forward to the conversation today, man. You might just tell the listeners more about yourself and kind of maybe your family story and how you got connected with the outdoors.
Well, I grew up in southern Illinois till about 1991. Grew up on a farm down there. About 1,200 acres and a pond. So mom and dad would go to work, and my brother and I would go squirrel hunting or fishing or whatever it was back then. So that all kind of went by the wayside in the early 90s, and we moved north a little bit and never really slowed down. You know, we moved up here. I had a pond less than a block from my house. So every single day I was at that pond fishing. And, you know, it's just a little borrow pit for the interstate that passed through, and we've done real well down there throughout the years. You know, that's been 91, so 30 some years now, and that's kind of where it all began. You know, I started bass fishing tournaments when I was a teenager, and then in 2001, my uncle came to me and said that a friend of his always takes a yearly trip to Mississippi crappie fishing. Now, I'd always crappie fished about like everybody else, I guess, during the spring with a slip cork and some minnows and caught some for dinner. But this was different, man. The internet was just kind of getting going back then, and I got on the internet and found a guy in Springfield, Illinois, about 20 miles from me, that tied his own jigs, and he claimed they worked real well, and I went and bought some and talked to this old guy for probably about 6 hours that day about bait making and jigs and crappie fishing, and just picked his brain because I wasn't a serious crappie fisherman back then. And so 2001, in late March 2001, we went to Mississippi for the first time, and I haven't picked up a bass rod since. It's been 110 miles an hour crappie fishing ever since. And that old man that I picked his brain about crappie fishing, he taught me how to tie, and he passed away in I think about 2014 or 15. I still kept in touch with his wife until she passed about a year or two later. And, man, COVID hit and I didn't have anything to do. So I thought, well, Bob told me how to tie, so I just as well get to it. And, like we mentioned before, Derek and I started talking, and Derek said, man, it's funny you say that because I think I'm going to get into the plastic bait business. And so he did the plastics and I did the hair, and the rest, as they say, is history. We talk on a weekly basis. He bounces ideas off me. I bounce ideas off him. We trade fishing pictures and fishing stories. And so far, everything's been real successful. So that's just kind of a little short history of how I went from bass to crappie, and I ain't looked back, and I don't plan to.
That's awesome, man. I grew up, I think all we did was fish for largemouth bass. I grew up in Northwest Missouri. My grandpa went with him all the time, and he got me into topwater fishing using a buzzbait, and that was always my big thing. Like when they would attack that on top, and it would almost scare me as a little kid. And I remember about the first time we really started hitting the crappie, we had this one farm pond that we had permission to go fish at from a local farmer. There were so many crappie in that pond, Miah. I was just hooked from that. And do you remember the old plastic lures, the sassy shad? like a
Absolutely.
sassy shad minnow. You could find them
Absolutely.
at Walmart back in the day. They would bite those 2-inch sassy shads all day long, and you could just get a whole slew of crappie. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's nothing better than this. This is awesome. So I've always been hooked on crappie fishing ever since then.
Man, I just it's hard to go back. Like I might bass fish. In fact, my daughter and I take a trip right around Father's Day every year back to where I grew up, and we still fish that same acre and a half farm pond for a whole day, and then the next day we'll hit some of the other little ponds down there. So still got a good rapport with all the old guys that own the farm ponds down there. So we'll do that, and show her how I got my start. But she loves it. I love it, but man, there's something about that crappie fishing. I just don't know if I could go back bass fishing full time or not.
Can you talk about some of the differences, Miah, between a hair jig and a plastic jig? So like in our conversation with Derek, I know he talked about some of his strategies of turning his to the side and just kind of letting it float and jigging it up and down. And then also he would say that they could just directly reel it back in as a swim bait. What's the difference with a hair jig?
So I'll tell you, from about 2001 when I really got into it until about 2020 when I started tying, all I ever used were Bob Folder's jigs, his tinsel jigs, and plastics, and you start using them enough, you start noticing, well, I'm catching 200 or 300 or 400 fish on this one jig, and this one plastic jig, I might catch 2 or 3 with. And then I got to switch, and then, now you're out of them, so you got to go buy another package. Well, it was all born out of laziness for me. When you get into tournament fishing, switching jigs or fixing your plastic and all that, it takes time, and time's money. So I just basically went straight hair, and you can fish it just like anything. I put it under a slip cork. You can cast it, you can reel it back. I primarily vertically jig. Obviously, when forward-facing sonar came out, that kind of blew up the vertical jigging game. But it's always something that I did anyhow. Standing timber or stumps or even brush piles back in the day. Just get out over the top of them and vertical jig them. But you can back off those brush piles and cast a hair jig just like you can a plastic over the top of it and retrieve it back or put it under a float. Either one, it's as versatile as they come, and you don't have to fool with it. It's like you put it on there and you forget about it. You don't have to ever mess with it, which is why I fish hair probably 90% of the time. That other 10% of the time, I got a top hat jigs on. That's pretty much all that's in my boat. I got another buddy of mine that's making some baits, and just like Derek's baits, they're tough, that they withstand, so that's something I like, and knowing that they're local family-owned businesses, something else that I'm big with. So, I think they all have their time, they all have their place. The thing I like about a hair jig is, if you feel like it's too long, take your scissors, cut some of that tail off. You can shorten it up. I just can't. Since I've started making them and using them, I haven't found a scenario where they wouldn't work. So I just kind of stick with them.
Yeah, I don't blame you. There's a channel on YouTube I follow. I won't say it here, just for the podcast. We're talking about your business today, but I remember he had a video where he would tie on a hair jig and just slid a classic small little circular bobber, threw it out there from a kayak towards the bank up against like some habitat, like some brush, and just let that lake current kind of move that along. And he was hitting the crappie a whole bunch in that video. I'll never forget. And I started thinking, I bet that would work out pretty good. Just letting kind of that natural movement go there.
Absolutely. I hear guys talk about, well, I like fishing one in the wintertime, or, I like fishing one in the summertime. And I said, I like fishing one when I'm fishing. That's just me. It don't matter. We fish from, daylight to dark, spring, summer, fall, winter. It don't matter. If for me, if the wind will allow me to go, I'm on it. And there's been times where maybe the wind wouldn't allow me to go and I was still going. So if I'm fishing, it's primarily a hair jig, and if I can't get them to hit a hair jig, I'll switch it up and drop them a plastic. I always have one of Derek's baits tied on, just in case they won't hit a hair jig. But, most of the time you can get them to hit one.
I've usually got his Lady May tied onto one of my rods. That's kind of always sitting there waiting, ready to go.
I like that Reaper, that black and silver, black and gray. I really like that one. So there's some other colors, and I get so mixed up because we talk so much about it. But the Teddy Bug and what in the heck's the Peacock?
Oh, yeah.
Teddy Bug and that Reaper. Those are some pretty good colors.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, so are you primarily fishing from a boat, or do you use your jigs also from the bank side?
99.9% of the time from a boat. Yeah. Now we'll run down here to the pond, So when I moved out of my childhood home, I moved about 2 blocks away. So I still live right next to that pond that I grew up on. So, but now it's only about 100 yards from me. So I get home from work, or, she gets home from school, we'll grab a rod and run down the pond and cast around the bank and do that. But most of the time it's out of a boat, and we don't have nothing fancy. I got a glorified John boat. That's all it is. I don't have the big fancy bass boats and all that. We got a little John boat with some fairly decent electronics on it. And so far we've been pretty successful out of it.
Yeah. How's the tournament season been going for you guys so far?
Well, for us right now, we just opened up. We've had 2 tournaments so far, and we've done real well. The first tournament, we ended up in first place, took big fish. My daughter was with me. She's my primary partner in these tournaments. So she ended up catching one that I think it final weight was 274. And that turns out that's the 4th largest crappie caught in club history.
Wow.
Biggest crappie caught by a youth or a female angler. And there's only 3 crappie bigger than hers, and I have 2 of those. So
man, that's awesome. I bet they almost look like big old stripers coming in.
Well, so she was fishing from the back of the boat, and she hollered at me. She says, "Dad, I got one." I turned around and her rod was doubled over, and I thought, man, she done hooked a catfish or something, and I failed because I know the quality of fish in this lake, and I didn't have the net out. It was 7:30 in the morning. The tournament had only been going on a half hour, and I failed big time. But man, she pulled that thing up, and I saw it, and I almost dove in the lake trying to get it. I was wet from my elbows down trying to get this thing in the boat, but we got it in the boat, and I think everybody in the county knew we caught that fish because I hollered pretty good. I had one of my buddies down the lake. He called. He said, "You all right over there?" I was like, "Yeah, we're all right. We're just excited." So about hour and a half later, I'd finally gotten the net out, and I saw another fish, and it was a good one. I told her, I said, "Hey, why don't you put your rod down and grab that net and come up here for me, would you?" And I said, "You see that on the screen?" And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "I think that's a crappie, and it's a pretty good one." I said, "If I can get her to bite, get her up to the surface, just slide that net right underneath her." She said, "Okay." First drop, man, that crappie pitched up. And, I mean, when she hit it. I set the hook, and she slid that net right underneath her, and the rest is history, man. And honestly, when I saw it the first time, so in 23, I caught one on the same lake that was 3.66 pounds. And I knew this fish that I just caught was bigger than that one. And honest to God, when I pulled it out at net, I thought it was going to go 4 pounds, and it didn't quite make it. But anyhow, it was 18 3/4 inches long and 18 1/4 inches around, and went 367. So
that makes for a good day.
Man, I'm telling you, I had to sit down and collect myself for about 15 minutes, and had a little snack and got my nerves calmed back down and went back to work, and it all worked out. We caught a couple good ones, and it was her and I's first win together, which was nice, and to set a couple records in the process was just a bonus.
Man, what a day. Well done. And those are memories that you and your daughter always remember.
Man, I'm telling you. And that Derek and I, we actually talked yesterday, and his dad was in the truck with him, and his dad's just one of them guys, just a great, great guy. And I told them, I was like, no offense to you guys, but I wouldn't have rather done it with anybody. That's a memory with her that, nobody can take from us, and that's how it ought to be.
Absolutely. Miah, thanks so much for coming out here on the show. How can our listeners and viewers stay connected with you, and how can they check out your products there with Dark Side Crappie Company?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, Dark Side Crappie Company. We post, jigs. We post all our tournament information. We post some of my friends that are in, other tournaments around the country. We post some of their things. We try and stay active. You can get a hold of me on there. Right now I can make, I think it's around a little over 16,000 different color combinations. So if you can think of it, I can make it. So send me a message, we'll work through it, decide exactly what you want, and we'll get them out to you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for coming on the show again. Good luck to you the rest of the year, and hopefully we'll stay in touch, man. All right?
Brent, I appreciate it, man, and absolutely. We'll get off here, and I'll get your information. I'll get some stuff out to you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. That's Miah Bolyard joining us here on Outdoor Adventures. Be sure to check out this program and all of our archives on the Brownfield Ag News YouTube channel, and you can always catch the audio version on the Agra America app. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield. We hope you have a great weekend, and get out on the water if you have the chance.